Good evening, I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. Welcome to Alaska weather. At the bottom of the screen, you'll find a phone number, a website address, as well as an email address. And those are your best ways, as always, to get the latest weather information outside of our show, as well as to get a hold of us if you have any comments or feedback. That phone number is 1-800-472-0391. You can call that number 24 hours a day and get a recorded forecast for your general area. You can also visit us at weather.gov/Alaska if you have internet access to get a 7-day forecast and lots more weather and climate information for your local area. You can also personalize that website address by replacing Alaska in the address with one of our local offices. So weather.gov/Fairbanks/Anchorage or /Juneau. And finally, the email address nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov is where you can send any feedback that you have for us anytime. Taking a look at the hazardous weather watches and advisories that we have out for the next 24 to 48 hours. Starting with the eastern Alaska range, we have a winter weather advisory that goes into effect at 7 p.m. this evening, and that's going to be running all the way through tomorrow evening. That's Thursday evening. That's going to be for snow, which can cause slippery road conditions along the passes in the eastern Alaska range. Expect 6 inches of snow total in the next 24 hours or so, with up to 8 inches locally. So make sure that you are prepared for winter driving conditions if you're headed through the eastern Alaska range in the next 24 hours or so. We also have a winter storm watch in effect for the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys. That's going to be in effect from tomorrow afternoon, that's Thursday afternoon, through Friday afternoon for heavy snow and blowing snow being possible during that period. That can also make travel difficult. So stay tuned here or to our website for updates. See if that gets upgraded to a winter storm warning in the next 12 to 24 hours. For that area, again, the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys, we are looking at the possibility of 6 to 9 inches of snow and wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour in that Thursday afternoon to Friday afternoon time range. So definitely something to keep an eye on as we get closer to that period of time. Taking a look at our latest satellite imagery for today, we are looking at not a whole lot going on across the state right now. We've got high pressure in command in general, so some high clouds over the northern part of the state. We can also see some moisture in the form of clouds heading into the western Aleutians. That's going to be associated with a front that's starting to move in. Also some moisture coming up into the northern Gulf of Alaska. That's going to be from another weak low pressure system moving north into that area. But overall, the message for today is rather dry conditions. So looking at our surface chart for today, we can see that high pressure in command both over the northern portion of the state, and really we could draw a line of high pressure from there all the way through southwestern Alaska and down through the Aleutians, where we see that 1038 millibar high sitting right over the Aleutians. We've got an occluded front, that front that we were talking about with satellite imagery, with that moisture coming off of eastern Russia and starting to make its way into the western Aleutians. So we've got some rain associated with that. We also have some showers associated with a trough over the northern Gulf Coast. Rain showers along the immediate coast from Anchorage eastward to Prince William Sound, and also across portions of the Panhandle. And then as we get further inland up into the Alaska range, that's where we're looking at that snow. And again, that's where we have that winter weather advisory in effect starting tonight. So speaking of tonight, we have that snow in the eastern Alaska range, but in general, we still have high pressure in command over much of the state. We do expect some freezing fog to develop with that high pressure over the North Slope for tonight. So if you're in the North Slope, make sure that you are aware of the potential for freezing fog, because it can act like very fine particles of ice on things as it freezes on contact. We also have some winds picking up in the Chukchi Sea tonight, so expect freezing spray for the Chukchi Sea. Also some snow along the immediate west coast for the Seward Peninsula and up to the Chukchi Sea coast. But again, with high pressure in command, we're seeing dry conditions over most of the state, from southwestern Alaska and interior Alaska down through much of the Aleutians and even most of the Panhandle, expected to be dry tonight. We do continue to see that occluded front marching eastward into the Aleutians, so rain spreading into the central Aleutians tonight. And we're starting to see a warm front with that moisture and clouds that we saw moving northward into the Gulf in the satellite image. Tonight we'll start to see a warm front moving north associated with that moisture. And for Thursday, we can see the low pressure system associated with that moving up into the Gulf and towards the Panhandle. So for Thursday, we still have high pressure over a significant portion of the mainland, but that moisture associated with that occluded front coming in from the west, from eastern Russia, starting to push that high pressure further to the east. So instead of being all the way down to the Aleutians, we're seeing high pressure more from the Alaska Peninsula up to the Beaufort Sea through the center portion of the state. So we'll see that occluded front continue to move eastward along with the rain out in front of it. So rain stretching all the way from the southern Chukchi Sea down through the Bering Sea and to the Aleutians. We'll also see some snow developing for the northwestern portion of the state from the Chukchi Sea down to the eastern portion of the Seward Peninsula. And again, up along that northwestern portion of the state is where we have that winter storm watch in effect for Thursday afternoon into Friday afternoon, where we may see some heavy snow as well as blowing snow with wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour. Also with those winds, we'll continue to see freezing spray in the Chukchi Sea for Thursday. And then looking ahead into Friday, that high pressure continues to get pushed further east, so now centered over Western Canada, but also strengthening to 1,040 millibars, so pretty strong high pressure over Western Canada at this point. We'll continue to see that occluded front moving further eastward from Russia, so we have rain moving into the eastern Aleutians and a little bit into the southern Alaska Peninsula, as well as spreading into the the west coast from the Seward Peninsula down to the YK Delta area. We'll still see some snow along the Chukchi Sea coast, as well as stretching down into the interior a little bit. And again, that winter storm watch for the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys remains in effect through the day on Friday. In the Gulf, we'll see another weak low pressure system starting to move north, but not a whole lot of impact from that at this point on Friday. Taking a look at your temperature forecast, low temperatures for Thursday morning, quite chilly still across the Brooks Range. I think last week we saw our first negative temperatures again in that eastern Brooks Range, and we'll continue to see that trend with some around 0 to negative temperatures in the Brooks Range. Cold temperatures in the teens along the North Slope and some single digits along the Yukon River in the interior. Warming as we head south as usual, with 20s to even around 30 for southwestern portions of the state, and some upper 20s to low 30s for south central. Warmest temperatures for the Panhandle ranging from about 35 at Yakutat to about 37 at Juneau, and into the lower 40s as we head further south into the Panhandle. And then finally for the Aleutians, looking like 30s for tonight. For Thursday afternoon, we've got our warmest temperatures once again in the Panhandle, peaking out around 50 degrees. Also some low to mid 40s for South Central, and upper 30s to low 40s for the YK Delta area. Much cooler as we head further north, with just highs in the teens for the Brooks Range and 20s for the North Slope. Friday morning, once again, negative temperatures in the Brooks Range with teens and some single digits even for the North Slope. Single digits also for much of the interior, with 8 degrees at Fairbanks, looking at 26 for Anchorage, and warming quite a bit as we head to the Gulf Coast, 38 at Seward. Also mid to upper 30s for the Panhandle, with some 40s for the southern Panhandle. And finally, a little bit of warming for Friday afternoon, as warm as the low 50s for the Panhandle, into the 40s again for South Central, but we'll see some warming in the southwestern portion of the state to the mid 40s, and even approaching freezing along portions of the North Slope.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to a look at your aviation weather for Thursday morning. We expect mostly VFR conditions across the state, but some small areas of IFR conditions across the western Seward Peninsula, as well as areas of the North Slope just north of the Central Brooks Range, and another area across the eastern Alaska Range, stretching from about the Yukon River at the Canadian border down to Prince William Sound. Also IFR conditions expected in the western Aleutians for Thursday morning, with some MVFR conditions in the northern Panhandle. For Thursday afternoon, we'll see IFR conditions developing in spotty locations around the state. Also looking at IFR conditions spreading eastward through the Aleutians, and some IFR conditions in the higher terrain of the northern Panhandle. For Friday morning, we'll see those IFR conditions in the Aleutians continue to spread eastward into the central Aleutians. Also some spotty IFR conditions along the west coast, but once again, mostly VFR conditions across the state for Friday morning. Friday afternoon, we'll see those IFR conditions in the Aleutians continue to spread into the eastern Aleutians, with mostly VFR conditions across the state, but some IFR conditions, it looks like, in the higher terrain of the southern Panhandle Friday afternoon. Pass conditions on Thursday: AKwx Pass MVFR in the morning, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Same story at Adigan Pass, starting out MVFR and improving to VFR on Thursday afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Passes both VFR on Thursday. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass both VFR on Thursday as well. Isabel Pass starting out the day at IFR but improving to VFR Thursday afternoon. And Mentasta Pass also starting out IFR and improving to VFR. Tanita Pass starting out at IFR but only improving to MVFR conditions on Thursday afternoon. Portage Pass expected to be MVFR through the day on Thursday. And Chilkoot and White Passes both starting the day out MVFR but deteriorating to IFR conditions Thursday afternoon. Thursday morning freezing levels, we are looking at surface freezing levels across much of the state, including almost the entirety of the mainland. We've got our 2,000-foot freezing level stretching across the west coast from the western Seward Peninsula down to the Alaska Peninsula and across the northern Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle. A tight gradient of freezing levels across the southern Panhandle, from 4,000 feet across the southern Panhandle to 12,000 feet just south of Haida Gwaii in the eastern Pacific. And then for the Aleutians and Bering Sea, we're looking at 4,000 to 6,000 feet for much of the area, with some warmer air coming in from the southwest into the area just south of the central Aleutians. Icing on Thursday. Expect some isolated moderate icing above 6,000 feet from Kodiak Island through much of the northern Gulf Coast and Panhandle areas, also stretching up the Alaska-Canada border up to the southern portions of the Brooks Range. Above 3,000 feet, isolated moderate icing also for much of the west coast of the state for Thursday. Jet stream winds on Thursday, we're looking at two main jets. One is arcing on the north side of a high pressure system that is centered over the eastern Pacific. That's going to be peaking out between 150 and 160 knots out of the west and northwest over western Canada. But over the Alaska portion of the jet, we'll see about 135 knots out of the west and southwest across the Panhandle. We have another secondary jet coming into the western Aleutians, peaking out at about 135 knots out of the west, and then a kind of tertiary jet across the western half of the state out of the north, peaking about 85 knots. 9,000-foot winds on Thursday. We've got strong winds south of the Panhandle in the Pacific, 60 to 75 knots out of the southwest, and a very narrow but strong jet at 9,000 feet stretching from eastern Russia down to the Aleutians. That's going to be 55 to about 70 knots out of the west and southwest. At 3,000 feet, we have our main wind over the western Aleutians, 55 to as high as 75 knots out of the south and southwest, so very strong winds for Thursday there. Not a whole lot of wind over the mainland or the Alaska Peninsula or Panhandle, though, on Thursday. And finally, for turbulence on Thursday, we do have where we saw those strongest winds at 3,000 feet. We've got some isolated severe turbulence possible over the western Aleutians below about 4,000 feet. Also some considerable moderate turbulence in patches over the west coast. And finally, considerable moderate turbulence over the southern portion of the Panhandle for Thursday below about 6,000 feet. Stay tuned for more Alaska weather after this.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there, or we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of their passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so that'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And now for a look at your marine forecast, starting with the sea ice edge. We've seen quite a lot of ice growth along the north slope, mostly behind barrier islands and bays over the last few days. We will see some melting of that ice though in the Chukchi Sea with increasing winds over the next couple of days, but that ice from about Utqiagvik east is expected to stick around. Taking a look at your marine forecast for southeastern Alaska, we are looking at Thursday, winds ranging from about 15 to 30 knots out of the southeast and east for the Gulf, with winds out of the southeast for the central and southern inside waterways, 15 to 25 knots, but northern winds lighter, about 10 knots for the Lynn Canal area on Thursday. Going into Friday, we'll see those winds become a little bit more consistent through the Gulf, at least in terms of speed, 20 to 25 knots out of the northwest, right along the Panhandle, and a little bit more easterly for the northern Gulf Coast. Seas coming up to about 8 to 9 feet over the Gulf. Winds and seas coming up a bit for the inside waterways as well. North wind 35 knots for Lynn Canal with 7-foot seas, 15 to 20 knots out of the northwest for the rest of the inside waterways on Friday. For Thursday across South Central, we have generally north and easterly flow, 15 to 20 knots across the board. Seas relatively small, 3 to just about 5 feet for Thursday. As we head into Friday, we'll see winds actually come down a little bit, 10 to about 20 knots, switching to more northeasterly and easterly flow for Friday. Seas coming up a bit in the Gulf, 7 to 8 feet, and 3 to 5 feet for Cook Inlet on Friday. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, we're looking at northerly winds 15 to 20 knots with seas 3 to 6 feet on Thursday. And heading into Friday, those seas are definitely coming up a bit, still about 3 feet in Bristol Bay, but increasing to 8 feet for the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, also increasing to about 8 feet for the Gulf side of the peninsula. Winds still about 15 to 20 knots for Friday. For the Aleutian chain on Thursday, this is where we'll be seeing our strongest winds for Thursday for the western Aleutians out of the southwest at about 45 knots, decreasing a bit as you head into the central Aleutians, 25 to 30 knots out of the south, more southerly flow on either side of Nikolsky, 10 to 20 knots out of the south, and some northeasterly flow for the eastern Aleutians, about 15 knots. Along with those high winds in the western Aleutians, we'll also see seas increasing to 18 to 21 feet. For Friday, we've got Seas generally coming down, but winds picking up for the central and eastern Aleutians to about 25 to 35 knots out of the south and southwest. Winds coming down, though, for the western Aleutians to about 25 knots out of the west. For the west coast on Thursday, we're looking at fairly strong southerly flow, anywhere from 15 to about 30 knots of wind. Seas increasing from the west on Thursday, so 23 feet just south of St. Matthew Island, but more like 3 to 4 feet right along the coast and 10 feet just south of St. Lawrence Island. For Friday, we'll see those seas increasing across the board from about 6 feet in Norton Sound and 9 feet down near Bristol Bay to 20 feet with 40 knot winds out of the south, just south of St. Matthew Island. So expect those winds and seas to be coming up for the west coast on Friday. And as we look at the Arctic coast for Thursday, we're starting to see some of those winds that we were talking about that's going to be deteriorating that ice over the Chukchi Sea. Southeast winds around 30 to 35 knots for the Chukchi Sea, 15 to 20 knots for the Beaufort Sea on Thursday. Heading into Friday, those Chukchi Sea winds are really just going to increase 30 to 40 knots for Friday out of the southeast, with seas also increasing to about 8 to 15 feet. 2 to 4 feet with just 10 to 20 knot winds for much of the Beaufort Sea on Friday, though. And recapping, tonight we have a winter weather advisory in effect for the eastern Alaska range. So remember to be prepared for winter driving conditions if you are headed through the eastern Alaska range. That is in effect for this evening all the way through Thursday evening. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.